Frank Greeny, an Irish reporter that lives in Ireland, covered the Conor McGregor sexual assault case, listened to his inside knowledge of what he heard inside the courtroom that got Conor McGregor convicted of sexual assault.
Frank Greeny, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Luke. Yeah, good to speak to you today.
Thank you. So who is Nikita Hand, and why was this case brought in the particular way that it was?
She is a 35-year-old hair colorist. At the time, back in December 2018 of these events, she was 29 years of age, essentially just starting out in her career. She was working in a salon in Dublin. She had and still has a young daughter. I think she was 7 years of age at the time. She was living with her then boyfriend in a house in Drimna, where she grew up, and that is also part of Dublin where Conor McGregor, as we all know, grew up too. And that's actually how they knew each other. Now, they didn't know each other very well, but obviously this is a very community orientated part of Dublin where everybody knows everybody. So they would have known of each other. They would have moved in the same circles. In her evidence, Nikita Hand told the jury that she knew Dee Devlin, who is Conor McGregor's fiance and the mother of his 4 children. So this is in the run-up to Christmas of 2018. She finished work at 4 o'clock. She and her colleagues were going out for their work Christmas party. They got ready in the salon. They had a few drinks there before moving on to an event not too far away from there. They went to a pub. More drinks were had. She was drinking beers. She admitted she had a lot to drink, Bacardi and Coke. She had also taken some cocaine throughout the night. She was wearing a red jumpsuit that night, and she'd posted a photograph of it, of her on her night out wearing the red jumpsuit. And Conor McGregor responded privately. She followed him on Instagram. He didn't follow her, but was able to comment on this photograph. And he essentially asked her where she was. Conor McGregor was on his own night out with his pals, some of his mates from his gym, fellow MMA fighters, and also his friend James Lawrence, who was also on trial before the civil courts. Now, the jury didn't rule against him, and perhaps we'll get into that in a little bit more detail later. But in any event, they ended up in a nightclub. They were drinking until the early hours. They left that nightclub at about 7 o'clock in the morning of the 9th of December 2018. Nikita Hand had kept the party going as well. She was back at the salon with her colleagues, where they were having drinks, listening to music, having a good time. And one by one, all of her colleagues started to go home as the night wore on. And in the end, it was just her and another girl that she worked with, a girl called Danielle Keeley, who also gave evidence before the High Court. And I suppose where their paths and their stories crossed, Conor McGregor and Nikita Hand, that is, there had been some contact throughout the night. Conor McGregor was in the company of another couple of girls in this nightclub. He wanted to go partying with them. They wanted to go home. So they got dropped off home. And Conor McGregor ended up on his own, driving around Dublin with a member of his security team at the steering wheel. And he ended up going out by arrangement with Nikita Hand to that salon, picked them up at about 10 o'clock in the morning. From there, they spent a couple of hours driving around Dublin, all in good form, all having drinks in the back of the car. Music was being played. They picked up his pal, James Lawrence. Conor McGregor said that he went into James's house and he essentially said to him, "Look, I have 2 beautiful ladies outside. Let's go and party. They want to party." James Lawrence joined them, and they ended up in the penthouse suite of a hotel in Dublin. That hotel, we heard, had been booked by on Conor McGregor's instructions by a member of his security team at about 4:30 in the morning. So this was many hours before he met Nikita Hand. And when he was asked during the trial why he would book a hotel room like that, he said it was he liked to rest after a night out. He liked to get up. He liked to shower in a hotel, work out in the morning. It was essentially to save him having to make that extra journey to go home. Now, Conor McGregor lived maybe 20, 30-minute drive away from.
I mean, I don't see how that question's relevant. He's not allowed to book a hotel room, whether he was having company or not. I mean, it's a stupid question. He's high, he's drunk, and he booked a room.
Where that hotel was. But in any event, they ended up in that hotel, the 4 of them, Conor McGregor, Nikita Hand, Danielle Keeley, and also James Lawrence and a number of members of his security team. And I suppose everyone was aligned in terms of the narrative and the story and the events of what led up to them arriving at that hotel. at about 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And the business of the jury when it came to their deliberations was what happened thereafter.
Okay, so that brings us to the essentially what happened thereafter. So I have a few things I want to go into, but I guess it makes the most sense to keep proceeding. Tell us how Nikita Hand alleges the night progressed from there.
Well, her story was that they were all sitting around the living room area of this penthouse suite. Drinks were brought to the room, vodka, Bacardi, mixers, beers. Again, everyone having a good time. Now, she said at one point she walked into one of the bedrooms and Conor McGregor was using the toilet and turned around and propositioned her. And she didn't think too much of it. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Left the room, ended up alone in the room with him again a short time later. And this is where she claimed that she was raped. And essentially what she told the jury in her evidence was that Conor McGregor made advances that she resisted. She had a boyfriend at home. She wasn't interested. As it turns out, she told the jury she was on her period. She had a tampon in. So even if she was interested in having...
Now, I saw evidence today that wasn't allowed in court saying on the way to the hotel, Nikita Hand was giving oral sex to Connor and his friend. So the story where she all of a sudden gets to the room and says, "Oh, I'm not interested at all," that's the evidence I read today. That wasn't admitted in court for some reason.
Sex that night, which she said that she wasn't. She said she wouldn't have given the circumstances. And also that there was that connection with Conor McGregor's fiance, Dee Devlin. So she didn't feel comfortable with what was going on. And she essentially pushed him away, thwarted his advances, I think was how she put it in her evidence. And she said that Conor McGregor refused to take no for an answer, that he started kissing her, rubbing her face, pushed her onto the bed, told her to relax, and pinned her at one point on the bed. And she said that she was resisting. She put her two hands up in front of her, trying to fight him off. And during the course of doing that, she said that she felt the full weight of his body coming down on top of her. And she was wearing a Michael Kors watch that she resulted in her scraping her breast, quite a nasty gash on her breast as a result of that. And she said that happened during the rape. She described then how she started to bite him. She said the only part of her body that she could freely move was her head. So she said her only line of defense was to bite him. And she said that she bit him hard and that he didn't like that. And that when she did that, he flipped her around and then grabbed her in a chokehold from behind. And she described how he choked her 3 times. And while he was doing that, she claims that he said, "Now you know how I felt in the octagon when I had tapped out 3 times." And that was...
I don't believe that part of the story at all. Conor McGregor is an egomaniac. He's on cocaine. He's drunk. And I just don't believe that he said, "Now you know how I feel when I got tapped out 3 times," as he's allegedly choking her. I don't believe that he said that at all because of his personality, his mentality. I mean, he described his sexual performance with her in court as exhilarating, long, and basically, exhilarating, long meaning the duration, and athletic. Do you really think that Conor McGregor is really going to say, "Now you know how I feel when I got choked out 3 times and lost fights"? I don't believe that for a second. It doesn't, no.
As a reference, the jury was told to the fact that he had lost one of the biggest fights of his career just 2 months later against Khabib. We all know what happened there and we know how he lost that fight. Now, interestingly, when that was put to Conor McGregor under cross-examination, he said, "Look, everybody knows who I am. I don't speak about defeats. I don't speak about fights that I've lost." So he denied saying that. But
when Conor's on the stand and he says that he doesn't speak about defeats, I believe him 1,000%. I don't think that he said that at all.
Keisha Hand, in her version of events, was adamant that he had said that. And while he was choking her for the third time, she said that she really thought she was going to die, that she was thinking of her daughter, that she was looking at the bedpost and she was thinking, how am I going to survive this? And she said at that point, she just submitted to him and whatever was going to happen. And she said it was that point that he raped her. Afterwards, she said then she described how somehow they fell asleep together. And when she woke up, she said she was in a panic. She didn't know what time it was. Conor McGregor's watch, who the jury heard earlier, he had apparently been boasting about, and that caused a bit of friction between him and her friend Danielle Keeley in the back of the house. But as it turns out, that watch didn't actually tell time. It didn't work. And so he couldn't tell her what the time was, according to Nikita. Her own watch wasn't working either. So she scrambled around looking for her phone to get in touch with her boyfriend. Now, as the hours went on, and again, there were differing versions in relation to all of this. But in Nikita Hand's version of events, she said that she was very confused because everybody seemed to be leaving at this point, and she wanted the party to keep going. She was, trying to convince everybody to stay and have drinks. This was just after 6 o'clock in the evening. We know that Conor McGregor left, and he left with Danielle Keeley, and his driver brought them both home separately, and that she then stayed on in the hotel with his friend James Lawrence for the next 4 hours or so. They were seen leaving the hotel, getting into a waiting taxi a little after 10 o'clock that night. Now, James Lawrence, in his statement to the Gardaí, the police here in Ireland, he claimed that after Conor McGregor had left the hotel, he and Nikita Hand had consensual sex on 2 occasions. She flatly denied that. In fact, the first time that was mentioned to her was after, or the first time that she realized that that was an allegation that was being made, or a claim that was being made.
So, after she was allegedly sexually assaulted, she stayed in the hotel for another 4 hours, was drinking and partying with Conor's friend. Conor's friend testified that he had sex with her 2 times. I mean, this story, no matter how you shape this, it makes Conor look like a total idiot. Of all the women that he has access to, he couldn't get a girl that he definitely knew wanted to have sexual relations, a female that's just as prominent as him. I mean, the decision making for Conor to even get to this point, and this has happened multiple times, and he just doesn't learn.
Was after he said to the Gardaí, she said that she had absolutely no memory of it. She said she didn't find James Lawrence attractive at all. She said that she wouldn't have had sex with him. And
now, I know what he's saying in this video. Nikita Hand keeps claiming that she wasn't attracted to Conor or his friend. But then there's other testimony he doesn't talk about that I read today, that on the way to the hotel, she was giving both of them oral sex. So she's not attracted to them? This story is a complete mess.
She also sued him for damages in relation to that. But as I said earlier, the jury didn't find in her favor in relation to him. So Nikita Hand's version then was that things started to come back to her that evening, that in the hours before, or in the hours that she was seen on CCTV footage coming in and out of the lift in the hotel and being in the underground basement, seemingly very lovey-dovey with James Lawrence, and indeed giving Conor McGregor a hug and a little peck on the back of the arm as he was leaving. And this would have been after she claimed that she had been battered and subjected to this brutal rape. She said she had no memory of that. And her case was that she was in delayed shock. She has since been diagnosed with suffering from severe PTSD.
Well, how do you convict somebody of sexual assault if the victim, every time they ask her factual evidence about things that she did or said, she goes, well, I don't remember that. I don't remember. Well, then how did she remember anything?
But clearly all of that was being challenged by the other side, by Mr. McGregor, when he gave his evidence over the course of a couple of days. And then, as I said earlier, it was up to the jury to decide which version of events they felt was more probable to be the truthful one.
Okay. You were in the courtroom to cover this trial, so some of the stuff we can get a description of, but we cannot have access to see ourselves. Namely, my understanding is there were photographic evidence once she had decided to go to law enforcement, and there you can see all of the bruising. For those of us who cannot see these photographs, could you describe the extent and nature of the bruising that you saw in those photographs?
They were horrific, extensive injuries. There was a very experienced paramedic who gave evidence to the jury of bringing Nikita Hand by ambulance to a sexual assault treatment unit at a hospital in Dublin. And she said in all her years working as a paramedic, she had never seen bruising as intense as the bruising that was on Nikita Hand. We saw the photographs, the jurors were shown the photographs. Nikita Hand was black and blue from head to toe.
Now, her boyfriend, who she went home to 2 days later, high and drunk, did they investigate the boyfriend that maybe he beat her up for coming home late? Because that is a possibility. There is definitely circumstances here that could put a shadow of doubt in the story. Connor wasn't the only guy within that time period that had access to Nikita Hand. His friend did, and so did her boyfriend. So, again, this is all Connor's fault for putting himself in positions like this. I'm just showing the evidence of what a court reporter heard in the courtroom with Conor McGregor and Nikita Hand.
The photographs were very, very difficult to look at for me as a seasoned journalist who, covers murder and rape trials in the criminal courts day to day. They were a very, very difficult thing to look at. You would have to assume it was very difficult for the juries to look at them too. We also heard evidence, and she was very concerned about a tampon that was still inside her, that had been wedged right up to the top of her vagina. And we heard from a doctor in the hospital who had to remove that with some difficulty, with some forceps. She was very distressed. There was some CCTV footage shown of her in the back of the ambulance as she was being brought to that sexual assault treatment unit. She could barely lie down. She could barely sit down. She was in a lot of pain. She was very uncomfortable. She was distressed, clearly very upset in that footage. She required the assistance of a wheelchair to get into the hospital.
It's pretty disgusting. I'm not going to repeat it. And the jury is made up of humans. 250,000 from Connor's bankroll of 100 million. Like, I have no clue what went on here or what didn't. There's multiple different stories. I'm just showing you what the court reporter is saying. Again, this is all Connor's fault for putting himself in this position to begin with.
Those were the physical injuries that the jurors would have to consider. Clearly, I suppose, given the sanctity, and I'm sure it's the same in the United States, given the sanctity of the jury room, we don't know how they arrived at their decision on Friday. But certainly, I think those photographs and the medical evidence that was heard during the trial would have been at the fore of their minds, in my opinion, because whenever seeds of doubt were raised in this case, I kept coming back to those. This was the next morning. She didn't want to press charges initially. Indeed, she didn't go to the Gardaí and make a formal complaint until close to a month later. But the Gardaí did speak to her in the hospital about what happened. She refused to name her attacker. She refused to tell her boyfriend who the attacker was. To the people who she had confided in, she asked them to delete messages, to delete photographs. A friend of hers had taken photographs of her injuries that night when she called over to tell her what happened before she went home to her boyfriend and her daughter. She was in a very distressed state, according to her friend, who did give evidence before at the High Court as well. So, they were very, very hard to look at. And aside from the physical injuries, she had also suffered significant psychological injuries. As I mentioned, she'd been diagnosed with severe PTSD. She had suffered with anxiety and bouts of depression before all of this happened, and that exacerbated all of that. So she is still requiring ongoing treatment and counseling as a result of what happened to her in that hotel.
Again, having being unable to see these things, it's a little hard to parse some of this. So it sounds to me like this is something that I can't say this, actually. I was going to say maybe this would have gone more forward with criminal charges in the United States, but that's hard to know as well. I guess what I would ask is, when you see something like that and then there are no criminal charges brought, How can we understand that? It seems like there would be like I'm not going to call it a forensic slam dunk, but certainly very strong evidence that a very bad incident happened here.
Yeah, well, look, in terms of the forensic evidence, I mean, it was clear that Conor McGregor and Nikita Hand did have sexual relations that evening, that there was some sexual activity. There was a forensic scientist who gave evidence about DNA samples that she had tested and that were a match for Conor McGregor. But I suppose what's important to remember is that a forensic scientist giving that evidence can't give any sort of opinion as to whether that sexual activity was consensual or otherwise. So in Ireland, the independent body that will decide whether or not criminal charges are brought and prosecutions are carried out is the Director of Public Prosecutions. So what happened in this case, and it's the same with every other criminal case in this country, is the Gardaí, our police force, would have investigated the complaint after Nikita Hand made it formally. They interviewed Conor McGregor. I think there were 4 interviews. He made some prepared statements or in consultation with his solicitors where he flatly denied the allegations. They would have harvested all the CCTV footage that they could to try and piece together a timeline in relation to events. They would have obviously had the medical evidence and all of that. Once they're finished their investigation, then the Gardaí hand that file over to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and it is essentially out of the investigations team then at that point. The DPP will review the case, and it is by case. They will look at its merits. But what they're really looking at is whether or not there is a reasonable prospect of a conviction. And they don't take cases until it meets that threshold. Not every allegation is pursued through the courts here in Ireland. I'm sure it's the same in the United States and elsewhere. And that was something that was very, very difficult for Nikita Hand to accept and to understand. Now, it's only in recent years that this office, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, has to give a complainant reasoning as to why prosecutions aren't brought forward. In the past, it was just a case of yay or nay, but now they do have to explain their reasoning to a certain degree. And they did that. We heard that she was sent some correspondence from the office. But even when they told her that simply there was insufficient evidence to bring a prosecution, Nikita Hand wasn't happy with the reasoning that she was giving. And she suspected that the reason that that a criminal prosecution wasn't brought was because of the person that she was making the allegations against, i.e. Conor McGregor, one of the most well-known sports people in the world. And she was assured in a follow-up letter from the DPP that that wasn't the case. We heard that the director herself actually carried out a full review of the original decision not to bring criminal charges, and the DPP was satisfied.
That's purely speculation. She's saying they didn't want to prosecute Conor because it was Conor McGregor. I personally believe she admits to being high, drunk, multiple times when they ask her details of things that she said or did, or gets confronted with testimony or evidence, she automatically says, I don't remember. Look, the evidence in this case, the bruises and the tampon thing, definitely made the jury award Nikita Hand $250,000. She wasn't asking for $250,000. When the case first started, she wanted $1.7 million. Conor McGregor's team made a counter offer. She said no, and the case ended up in court.
Having looked at the file again, having taken a second look at everything, and Nikita Hand did get a lot more detail, I suppose, as to why criminal charges weren't brought, and they felt that it was difficult to corroborate her version of events. The evidence or the statement that was made by Conor McGregor's friend James Lawrence, who claimed again that he had consensual sex with Nikita Hand twice after Conor McGregor had left the hotel. So this would have been in the hours after she had claimed that Conor McGregor raped her in the penthouse suite. And the DPP felt that it was very difficult with that statement in the mix. It would be very difficult to get a conviction across the line. Her behavior, which was described as odd in the CCTV footage, where she's seen putting her arms around Conor McGregor as he's leaving the hotel, giving him a little peck on the back of the arm. You know, the DPP would have asked themselves, like, will a jury find
No.
that this complainant's story is.
If a jury saw that in a criminal case, that after she was allegedly sexually assaulted, that she was hugging Connor outside the hotel and kissing the back of his arm, not in a million years, they could come up with PTSD, whatever you want to call it, he wouldn't have been found guilty. That's why they dropped the case.
The truthful version of events. And again, it has that
Excuse me, dropped the criminal case, that is.
higher standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think that's really the crux of the issue when it comes to the lack of a criminal prosecution being brought, was the DPP didn't feel that they would be able to pass that very high threshold in terms of convincing a jury in a criminal court beyond a reasonable doubt that Conor McGregor had raped her in that hotel room, and that's why criminal charges weren't brought, and she was assured that it wasn't because of the identity of the suspect. Now, it's important to also point out that Conor McGregor and his legal team seem to try and portray Nikita Hand as a gold digger. So in paperwork that was submitted to the court before this trial got underway, they were essentially describing her claim as an act of extortion. And that was because of the sums of money that she was looking for: €750,000 for rehousing, €1 million in loss of earnings, past and future. So, 1.7 odd million euro was what she was looking for. And their side claimed that this was malicious, that this was a made up story just to get money out of Conor McGregor. But I think it's really important, and the jury was told this, that it's really important to point out that Nikita Hand didn't pursue these civil proceedings until the DPP had told her that they wouldn't be pursuing criminal proceedings. So that was her first port of call. When that door was closed for her, she went down another avenue because she wanted her vindication. She wanted to be believed. And that's what set in train the sequence of events that led to that jury coming back, ruling in her favor, ruling against Conor McGregor on Friday evening.
In your experience covering criminal trials in Ireland, let me back up a step. There is a presumption, I think, whether it is based out of information that is accurate or just an assessment from pop culture, that when someone suffers a horrific crime that Nikita has alleged has happened, that they, once it is concluded, if they're alive, they run out of there like the building is on fire. Mm-hmm. And so you're pointing out that there was this CCTV footage that, in the case of McGregor's defense, they had pointed at, and of course the DPP as well, that there is something I think they would allege is unusual here. So my question is this: are there typical ways people react when they become victims of sexual assault in the immediate aftermath?
I'm really glad you've asked the question, because the answer is, and as I say, I've over a decade experience covering cases involving sexual violence, and no two cases are the same. And what you've described there, a complainant or a survivor of sexual violence bursting out of a hotel room or otherwise, arms flailing in various states of undress, screaming help and crying rape, that's for the movies, that's Hollywood. In reality, that rarely happens, if at all. More often than not, in my experience, a person who finds themselves in that situation does what any other human being would do, and they just try and survive it. They try and cope it. They try and get through it. Nikita Hand described how she felt like Conor McGregor was going to kill her, and that was her evidence before the jury. She was being choked. She was breathless. She thought she'd never see her daughter again. Even if she wanted to run down the corridor and raise the alarm, which she clearly didn't do, and that was the evidence. I mean, she had an MMA fighter, a UFC champion, one of the greatest champions the sport has ever known, pinning her down on the bed. She said she had an out-of-body experience where she just let whatever was going to happen because she went into survival mode. And then what happened afterwards? Look, it wasn't like, looking at it objectively, if you didn't know the background.
I mean, that is true, and the jury's going to look at it that way. He's not the average guy, right? He's not some guy that works at ShopRite. He's a UFC champion that's trained in every combat sport that you could think of. So the mentality where she's just going to try to survive and hug him and play it off like everything is okay. This whole oh man, Connor, if you see this, you need to smarten up. You need to sober up, and you need to make better decisions. This whole thing makes you look horrible. Who's telling the truth? Who's lying? Let's just meet somewhere in the middle, and I'm gonna leave it at that.
The case, and if you were asked to take a look at that footage, and if you were to look at that group, and if you were to ask somebody, you know, which one of that group has been subjected to a brutal rape at the hands of an MMA fighter just a few hours beforehand, you are unlikely to point to Nikita Hand, because she was seen with drinks in her hand. She was seen hanging out of the likes of James Lawrence, giving Conor McGregor that hug and that little peck that I spoke of, trying to convince people to stay, making phone calls, lying to her boyfriend about her whereabouts and who she was, or who she was with. She wanted to keep the party going. But that can all be explained in the very simple reality that in these situations, people often suffer from what's called delayed shock. And it was in the hours afterwards. And also,
I don't think a jury's going to believe that. So he's saying that Nikita Hand, after she was allegedly sexually assaulted, that she wanted to keep the party going. She was coherent enough to text her boyfriend and her daughter, lie, saying, "Oh, I'm here," when she really wasn't there. She was somewhere else. Drinks in her hand, wanted to keep the party going. This is exactly why the criminal case wasn't pursued. And her lawyer knew that a jury would feel some type of sympathy for the incident and be rewarded some type of damages, excuse me. And you know what? Connor deserves to pay those damages because he's an idiot.
not forget there's no escaping the fact that, you know, she had a lot of drink on board and a lot of cocaine was taken throughout the course of the day. She had been up all night partying as well. You know, that would have fed into the delayed shock. At least that's what the jury was told. And it was only then, as the hours went by and the effects of the alcohol and the drugs started to wear off and things started to come back to her, and she had shared that, she said, with James Lawrence when she became very upset in the hotel. And while her recollection of every little matter and every little detail wasn't 100% accurate all of the time, and there were inconsistencies at times, and clearly Conor McGregor's defense barristers would have aimed to
there's inconsistencies in her testimony because she's high on cocaine for 24 hours and drinking nonstop for 24 hours. That's why this case didn't get prosecuted in a criminal court.
Exploit those and to point those out to the jury in no uncertain terms. I mean, in my experience covering these types of case, there's rarely a situation where somebody remembers every little detail perfectly, and then it's because of that trauma. Nikita Hand went to see one of...
You can't... This isn't like a girl that was just walking down the street and got plucked and something happened to her. You're comparing... It's like apples and oranges, the two types of attempted sexual assaults. Connor, sober up, leave the cocaine alone, and knock it off already.
The most renowned and well-known psychiatrist in this country, a woman called Dr. Ann Leader, and she diagnosed her as suffering from severe PTSD. You don't get diagnosed with severe PTSD unless you have suffered a significant trauma, which Nikita Hand, I think is fair to say, did in the penthouse suite in the Beacon Hotel back in December of 2018. So, you know, to sum it up, like in my experience, no two cases are the same, obviously, but in my experience, it's very uncommon that you would see somebody running out the door, arms flailing, looking for help, dialing 999, looking for assistance. It's rare that it happens.
I'm going to ask this question only in the interest of due diligence and to make sure that the audience gets as much information to make an informed decision about as possible. Could you explain what McGregor's team identified as various inconsistencies in Nikita Hand's stories and to what extent they were relevant?
They made they made, like, look, they would have described a lot of what the other side was saying as noise, and the same charge was put to the defense. Nikita Hand's barristers and her legal team would have told the jury on day one that this was actually a very simple case that may look like a complicated one, and that everything surrounding the facts, the 5 or 6, it could be summed up in 5 or 6 sentences, and everything else is just noise to distract. Her side would have accused their barristers of trying to throw as much dust in the eyes of the jurors. A lot was made of lies that she told to her boyfriend. As I mentioned, she at the time, her boyfriend, they owned a house together in Drimna with their young daughter, and she was out at her Christmas party. And at various points, and she did accept this, she didn't try and shy away from it. She did lie to her boyfriend about where she was going.
Now, I know it's Connor's attorney's job to pinpoint or bring up character issues in Nikita Hand. But it's not a crime to lie to your boyfriend. And here we go again with the amount of men that had access to Nikita Hand other than Conor McGregor. So her boyfriend's going to be pissed that she's coming home 2 days late, high and drunk, lying on text messages. There is the probability that he might have beat her. Again, I'm just putting it all out there. I'm not saying that's what happened, and I'm not defending Conor. I'm going to put this in the middle, and that's where I think the jury said balanced it out here 50-50. So if Conor didn't put himself in this position, this never happens. So deal with it.
Who she was with, and what happened. We heard that when she came back to her home in the early hours of the following morning, her boyfriend had actually secretly recorded the conversation that she had. She told him that she had been attacked, that she had been raped. There were inconsistencies in that account, and also there were lies that were told, and she would have admitted to the jurors that she did tell lies. She lied about.
So Nikita Hand and her attorney want the courtroom to believe that Nikita Hand's boyfriend taped her saying that Conor sexually assaulted her without her knowledge. Why would he do something like that? Why would he have to tape it? Why wouldn't he just say, hey, call the cops right now and, start an investigation? It's really shady. It's really shady stuff. They try to present to the court a hidden device from Nikita Hand's boyfriend that, I taped my girlfriend without her knowledge talking about the sexual assault that allegedly happened. I don't even want to comment on this.
About her whereabouts. She claimed that she was in another hotel in Dublin city centre when she was in fact in the Beacon Hotel. Now, in relation to that, she told the jurors that, she thought that she was in that hotel because of the interior of the room. She'd been in that hotel before, so she thought that's where she was. Whereas Conor McGregor's barristers were saying the reason she had referenced that hotel was to turn attention away from the Beacon Hotel, because she was worried that the CCTV footage that was eventually harvested wouldn't support her claim that she had been raped by Conor McGregor during the few hours that they were all there partying. There was also the evidence of her friend, Danielle Keeley, who gave evidence to the jury of not hearing or seeing anything that would suggest that Nikita Hand had been raped in that room. At no point did she seem distressed. At no point did.
So her own friend, Nikita Hand's own friend, is saying she didn't hear or see anything that would indicate that her friend was being sexually assaulted. I'm done.
Did she seem upset? She also gave evidence of Nikita Hand trying to get everyone to stay as she and Conor McGregor were leaving the hotel. I suppose what the jurors were being asked was, are they the actions of somebody who has been brutally and savagely raped by Conor McGregor. There was also talk of a phone call that she made to Conor McGregor, a very short phone call shortly after he had left the hotel. Now, she couldn't remember making that call, and she couldn't remember an awful lot about the hours after Conor McGregor had left. But again, the jury was being asked, why is she calling Conor McGregor if this is the man that she will go on to accuse of raping her? Now, I think it's clear, and the jurors would have been allowed to infer that the reason that she was calling him was because she and James Lawrence had essentially been locked out of the penthouse suite. We saw them both going up and down in the lift, but not able to get access to the penthouse suite. So clearly Conor McGregor, having booked the room, needed to give them that access, but that was obviously a matter for the jurors to consider. So there was all of that evidence, and also something that muddied the waters in terms of deliberations was the evidence of Conor McGregor's friend James Lawrence, because James Lawrence described the hours after Conor McGregor left, and he essentially told the jurors that Nikita Hand was trying it on with him, that he wasn't interested, that he batted her away a number of times, but that he eventually relented, and they ended up having what he described as fully consensual sex twice. Now, there was no evidence to suggest that forensically that they had had any sexual interactions, but he said that he had worn a condom, so it's not that unusual that if it had happened, that there wouldn't be any forensic traces of it. So that, from the defense's point of view, there was a lot of evidence that I suppose was raising question marks and raising doubts in relation to the narrative that Nikita Hand was giving. But again, she accepted that her behavior after Conor McGregor, after the rape had taken place, she accepted that it was bizarre, that it was odd, that it was out of character. She got very upset when she was watching the CCTV footage of her in the lift with James Lawrence, because she said it was like looking at somebody else. It was like looking at a different person. She didn't remember it. And that was the evidence that she gave. And she was accused of having selective amnesia as well, of like remembering specifics about the rape, but not details that would actually work in favor of the other side. And again, that's something that the jurors would have had to wrestle with. Conor.
I mean, I agree there. You can't just say, well, I only remember this specific thing here. You claim you don't remember anything, but specific things to help your case you remember, but anything that contradicts it, oh, you're saying, I don't remember that. I don't remember. I don't, over and over and over again. It's not like you have a counter argument. You're saying, I don't remember. It's not a good look.
McGregor would say that his story didn't change from the moment that he went into the Gardaí and gave them what was a prepared statement, a statement that was prepared with his solicitors. But the jurors also heard, despite his claim that he wanted every shred of evidence to be put before the court, the jurors were also told that in the 100 plus follow-up questions that he was asked by detectives investigating this case after making his statement, not once did he make a comment, as is his right. And the jurors were told that they can't make any adverse inferences into the fact that he answered no comment to the 100 plus questions that they asked him after he prepared those statements. But there was also a claim from her side that there was an element of collusion in this case, that Conor McGregor and his friend, the second named defendant, James Lawrence, had essentially concocted a story, made up a version of events so that they could get away and that they wouldn't be found of any wrongdoing. Now, clearly both of them would have denied that. We know the jury didn't find in her favor in relation to James Lawrence, but they did find in favor of her in terms of the case that she was making against Conor McGregor.
So ultimately, she was awarded approximately $250,000 US, give or take. Why were the damages? Explain the damages. As you mentioned, she was given nothing related to the James Lawrence situation. She was related to Conor, but even then, not the full breadth of what she'd wanted against Conor relative to what she was asking. How did they end up with $250,000 approximately?
Well, exactly how they ended up with that figure, we don't know. Again, that was something for the jurors and the jurors alone to.
All right, I'm going to end it here. You get the gist. Conor, if you need a full-time babysitter, maybe you should put me on the payroll. Instead of after clubs, heading to hotels, I'll make you hit the pads in the bag and do some jogging, because you really need a full-time babysitter. It's time to sober up and knock it off.